Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Pondcast. Today's episode, State of the Franchise, where we have a frank discussion about the Pokémon Company and Nintendo as a whole. I'm your host, Draco, and joining me today is Chase.
How's it, everyone?
And let's dive into it.
So, with Home obviously dropping on the 30th.
Finally.
It's been a while. Let me just say, I don't get why people are so upset about it. I mean, okay, I can understand why people are so upset about it, but not to the extent that they were portraying it as, because most people use Home for but now in total, it's just transferring the mons and that. But yeah, I wonder if we'll be able to use those transfer-only moves in Scarlet and Violet, because in Gen 8, if the moves weren't coded into the game, you couldn't use them. And especially in competitive, if you brought mons from a different region, you had to reset their moves.
Yeah, from the looks of it, it's going to be one of those, hey, you need to delete this move. But from my understanding is with the ability to move the Pokemon back and forth between the different games now, which is huge. I think that's really where a lot of the sticking points for a lot of people came from. Because this is the first time we'd be able to take a Pokemon from a future generation and put it into a past generation where it used to be only one way for the most part. But Home was supposed to allow you to retrain any move that would be allowed on that Pokemon from any generation, so long as it was understood that, hey, when you transfer it into this other game, if the move isn't there, you're going to end up having to delete it.
I definitely think that Home is now going in the direction that they first wanted it to be in, because I don't know if you remember when they first announced it, they said there'd be like mini games and such, and then I think that Home's going that way. And I think, well, am I correct in assuming that you are a big advocate for the Dream Radar making a return?
Well, if not the Dream Radar, but the Dream World. And
yeah,
I've been personally more of an advocate of, if you're going to restrict Pokemon that will be available in certain games, then we need something where we can breed, train, and level up Pokemon that aren't in the games, but we still want to, because some people like to have a competitive ready Pokemon that they can pull into a game, breed out one that would be quote-unquote legal in the game, because meaning, that it has the mark, it's allowed to battle in the battle tower or whatever they decide to put in there. And just having to do it from scratch every time it's very tedious, and after a while people will lose interest. If you've got something in a way where you can do it collectively, like a battle stadium or something like that, I think people would be more enticed to purchase the product. And so this is one of the things, like I'm always saying, that Home needs something like this, or we need a game that ties to Home that will allow you to do this and is updated with every new Pokedex. And all it's a game where there's no story, there's nothing to explore. It is straight up battle stadium, battle coliseum, where you not only can use your Pokemon, any Pokemon, with X amount of moves, because you can patch the moves in and out as needed, but where you can breed and train and level your Pokemon up so that if you just want to get into competitive, that's the game for you.
Yeah, so that's the direction I actually think that Home is going in, because having this like quote-unquote move relearner feature that is supposedly going to be in the next Home update, and then the rumored sort of PK Hex feature that Ku's been heavily rumoring and saying it's going to come with the DLC. I don't think that's necessarily going to be in the DLC or in the actual game DLC. I think that might be a feature that releases with Home once connectivity with Home to the DLC, that DLC Home connectivity happens.
I could see something like that, because Pokemon has been trying to do two things at the same time. They've been trying to stem the cheating or the hacking. The Pokemon Company has been doing a lot to try and curb people from using things like PK Hex or other cheating methods to generate Pokemon that are more desirable than catching them in the wild. And so them doing something like this, I'm not surprised, because the more they incorporate into the games that take away from those other programs, the less likely you're going to see instances of hacked Pokemon that bypass their checks. Because not for nothing, as good as they think their check system is, it isn't perfect. There are still people who are getting things through. And so if GameFreak gets in front of it and does give you the ability to get a little bit better with the manipulation on your end in the game, then it's less likely for people to go and grab a third-party program to do it for them, especially considering that it levels the playing field for those that actually do versus those that actually don't.
So, I mean, it's relatively easy to get these sort of genned or quote-unquote hacked Pokemon into Scarlet and Violet. I mean, there are people now who are running quote-unquote hacked raids, so they can customize the end of raid drops, the stats of the Pokemon, so it'll always have 6 IVs, whether it's a 1-star or a 6-star raid, and then all you really have to do is EV train it.
I think the next step that they're going to try and do is find a way to swap the actual Pokeballs out. So if you happen to catch a Pokemon in a very specific ball, you can hot swap the ball that it's in with another ball in your inventory. Because
it would actually be a brilliant thing for them to implement. I think the Pokemon Company International have done themselves a disservice by not getting in contact with the guy who developed PK Hex and actually asking him to come down for like your championships or the proper official competition, like the international competitions, and having him be the person who actually checks the legality of Pokemon before they can then take part in the events.
It would be a massive undertaking. They honestly, because of the fact that it would have to be every championship tournament that's out there, not just for Worlds, but leading up to Worlds, because of course you're going to want to make sure that the people who are moving up the ranks are using legal Pokemon and not using genned Pokemon that bypass their checks and balances. Or even honestly, if they just grab him and say, hey, look, dude, we're not going to sue you, but can you give us, something that is unique unto your system that's going to allow us to block people who are using these particular Pokemon in competitive play. We won't ban them, but we'll definitely block them. So that in itself, I think, implemented inside of home, inside of the current games or whatever, would help with stopping the inflow of these gen Pokemon. But if Pokemon themselves are implementing something similar to PK Hex into either the DLC or home, number one, I'd like to see how they would implement that and still not get a flag thrown out for quote-unquote genning a Pokemon. But narrative-wise, what would be the reason for them to do it to begin with?
The thing is, my understanding is, if you're genning for competitive play, then I don't have an issue with it, as long as the Pokemon itself is legal and obtainable in the way that you've genned it, then that should be good, because not everybody has time to sit around and breed hundreds of eggs for the perfect Pokemon, because people have to go to work, they have to go to university, school, whatever it is. As long as you're not doing any actual harm, like for example, trying to gen in a Lucario that knows Dragon Ascent, then I think that's more of a gray area and it could be seen as more acceptable. So I don't have an issue with that, as long as you're not directly trying to harm other players and sort of mess with their experiences. It should be all good. Obviously, it would be preferable to have stuff that you've gone through the work and gotten them yourself, but unfortunately, the reality is people are busy, and I think the Pokemon Company might have realized that, and that's why they've decided, if it does happen, to implement this sort of PKX system into the games and make it something that's official.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, Pokemon, when it first came out, I was in high school. Actually, I think I just finished graduating, and I had way more time to play Gen 1 than I do to play Gen 9 with all of my adult responsibilities, these days. And as much as I would love to have a competitive team ready to go, that is very time consuming, even with all the measures that they've taken in the last couple of generations to make it easier to get a competitively viable Pokemon. That still takes a lot of time.
I do think it is very much a gray area, but unfortunately I think the way the games are going, and they are making things more accessible every iteration, but I don't want to sound rude or anything, or sound like I'm hating on the games, because I don't. I mean, it's one of my favorite franchises, but I think they do need to put in a bit more effort to sort of include everyone, whether you spend an hour a month on the game or 12 hours every day on the game.
I think they need to take... I mean, I agree with you. It's a gray area. I personally don't have a problem with somebody who's bringing something in that is competitive, that is viable in the game. that doesn't exist outside of the existing rules. If that's the road you want to take, as long as you're keeping as legit as possible with your build, I'm okay with that. The moment you step outside of that boundary, there's the issue for me, because you are taking away the experience for somebody else. In doing, and I completely agree with what you said. But at the same time, you're right. It's a big TCPI is an insanely lucrative franchise. They've got so much money. They can take the time to do it right. And I hate to say this. I got into a conversation with a friend of mine last Sanctum who pointed out that the $1 million company just dropped a game that, even though for the bones it's still the same, it is gargantuan in size. There's so much to do. And the $1 billion company pumps out a game that is glitchy as all, because let's face some facts. Scarlet and Violet had its issues on its launch, and it were not small issues. These were huge issues. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, though it has its glitches, a whole lot smoother. There is a distinct difference, and franchise-wise, one makes more money than the other. There really wasn't an excuse for stuff that had happened with Scarlet and Violet, and there isn't an excuse for Pokemon to go ahead and start implementing some of these changes that they need, that honestly the game does need. It's got to factor in that its largest consumer are not kids. They're adults. They're us.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think Pokemon stuck to that sort of 2D indie art style, or well, game style rather, up until Gen 6, where a lot of other companies moved away from that a lot sooner. And I mean, from Gen 6 on, you could see there were a few issues. Obviously, the DS era of consoles weren't exactly the most powerful, and I think that the Pokemon Company and GameFreak did their best to push the hardware as far as they could without actually breaking the games, and I think that's what they've tried to do with Scarlet and Violet. But I think they have always had an issue with, one, compressing their game, so the game itself could be a lot smaller. Their compression software was a lot better, but I think they also need to bring in some outside developers. Obviously, not ones that work outside of Nintendo. They probably want to keep developers that are in Nintendo's scope to sort of help them tackle their problems and sort of help them develop the game that we all know that they're capable of. I mean, I don't really think it's an issue of them pumping a game out every 3 years, because if they had the right tools to achieve what they're trying to achieve, then they hands down would be some of the best games on the market. But I think that's not happening, and I think I've mentioned it before, and I think they sort of shot themselves in the foot with how tightly constrained that they'd made their own rules, and I think it's sort of difficult for them to deviate out of those rule sets without changing the rules a bit.
You know, it's funny you should mention that, because again, going back to the conversation I had just the other night with my friend, he had mentioned that the guys who did Zelda got a hold of, I don't exactly know the specifics, but they found a new compression rate that was a 3-to-1, which is why Tears of the Kingdom is insanely huge, where there's actually 3 physical maps that are about the size of the map of Hyrule. There is a seamless transition between the 3 maps, because another friend of mine, Omni, he built a vehicle, he drove through the hole, and halfway through it disappears. So it's a very brief load screen between map 1 and map 2. But there's 3 full-size Hyrule-sized maps in this game, and that says a lot. We know from reports that people from the Zelda team were helping the people on the Pokemon team. So at this point, they're Gen 10, because we know they're already working on Gen 10. They've been working on Gen 10. They've had to have been. Gen 10 needs to be spectacular, and I agree with you that they have put themselves in a hole that they need to dig themselves out of with their tight scheduling. I think there needs to be more time between generations to make sure that the games are polished much better than they've been. Don't get me wrong, I love this franchise. My wife has me listed on her phone at one point as her Pokeboy, because that is my shtick. You know, I'm 44 years old. I'm still playing Pokemon, and I love this franchise, but I see the issues, and I am not afraid to point out the cracks in the wall. And I agree with you. They need to really step it up, because there is no reason that the #1 entertainment company in the world releases a game like the way Scarlet and Violet did. When people on a much less budget are producing fan-made stuff that is better quality than what the actual company is, because there was that Chinese game that had the animations that were absolutely beautiful. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they had the Blastoise with the water coming out of the actual cannons and not out of midair. We've seen video images of someone who's turned Generation 1 into that stylized 2D HD type world, which I think that would be an amazing game to play, graphically speaking. I don't care if it is Gen 1. You can throw in the new generation mechanics into that, but playing that very stylized game that is so retro to the franchise, I think would infuse a huge amount of new blood, as well as bring back old players for that nostalgia. And I think it would be a great idea. You know, we've seen so many artists out there that are crafting Fakemon that legitimately look like they would work. All of this untapped potential, and the number one entertainment company is just kind of would rather shut those people down, would, you know, order cease and desists, and really just not taking the opportunity that is before them to bring on board some of these creative talents and say, all right, go for it.
I think they've loosened up a bit on cracking down on sort of your Fakemon artists and your people creating fan games. Obviously, some of them, if they get too close to the actual games, then I think they sort of within their rights to do that. For example, before Pixelmon branched off into the various different mods, it was very close to an open world. Well, it was pretty much an open world Pokemon game, but within Minecraft. And they'd shut that down. Just for a bit of context, for those who don't know, I work on one of the Pixelmon mods as one of their asset developers. From that point where they first initially shut it down till now, there's been no peep from the Pokémon Company with regards to any of the Pixelmon mods. A lot of fan games are doing quite well. Pokemon Xenoverse, for example. That's probably one of the best fan games out there. And I mean, if you look at that, not too long before that released, they cracked down on Pokemon Uranium, which was at the time one of the best Pokemon fan games out there. So I think they're becoming a bit more lenient, but I think they should look to the community more for inspiration rather than trying to cut people down sort of creatively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they should actually start recruiting, to be perfectly honest, because even though it might not be to their standard, the creativity is there. You can take somebody, pluck them out, you know, where they're at, and use their creative passion and kind of guide them to where you want them to be to create for you. And that's only going to garner much more goodwill than shutting things down like that.
But again, I also think it's a very slippery slope for them, because it wears the line between allowing stuff to happen and then people creating games based on their copyrighted material that actually end up doing better than their actual games, which also in the same breath should be sort of a kick in the butt for them to sort of put their A into G and try and develop not better games, but sort of more stable games.
I think legality wise, if they're going to try and do something like that, you know, putting out their statement, you know, something that's legally binding, saying, hey, look, we'll let this much percentage slide. Once you cross into this other percentage, we're going to have an issue, at which point you're going to have to either A, dial it back, or B, shut down. You know, give people the option and a slight flex and be a bit more flexible. So not only can you cultivate goodwill in the community by allowing people to stretch out a little bit and try some different things with the IP, but once someone comes up with something that is totally unique, totally brilliant, allowing them to flex that muscle a little bit would allow them to be able to go, you know what, that's a great idea. Can we use your idea? You know, work out some kind of an agreement, or even hire them straight on, because honestly, at some point, you're gonna need to hire new blood anyway. Might as well take it from the impassioned fans that are putting their time, their money, their effort into crafting something that is unique. this is all stemming from the whole PKX thing, to be honest, because this has started with people who want a specific Pokemon. Okay, cool. Whatever. But it's grown past that. I mean, we see it in the art, you see it in the fan-made games. And I'm not talking about the jokey ones like the ones that PETA put out because they're, PETA, but actual legitimate ones, like you mentioned Pixelmon that you work on. You've got Pokemon Uranium, Pokemon, what is it, Black or Black?
You might be thinking of Blaze Black.
Yeah, Radical Red. Those are basically rehashes of an existing IP, but they've done things to make them different. A completely different experience. It's not the same. It's not the traditional Gen 1, which they keep bringing back. And I think as long as they're not touching the way Gen 1 plays, you're fine. But maybe there's something in those games that could be incorporated into the new games, and by cultivating the community, you can bring them on board.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of potential with the community, and I think if the Pokemon Company could capitalize on that, they would be doing themselves a justice.
And I think it would actually serve the community well. I mean, it would garner a lot of goodwill, especially with how badly things have been handled game-wise in the last couple of releases.
Look, I think I won't use it as an excuse, but I mean, it will come off that way. But look, the Switch isn't the most powerful console. And I mean, you look at people running Scarlet and Violet through emulators, whether it's on computers, laptops, or even the Steam Deck. It does run quite well. Obviously, the glitches and the niggles are still there. But just from a stability and sort of the way the game runs, it's like night and day. And obviously, there are games like, for example, Tears of the Kingdom being one of the most recent ones, where they've taken essentially one of the best AAA games to come out this year and put it on a substandard console in terms of its ability to run games. I think they've done quite well. But I think a lot also has to do with the Switch hardware, and I think it is due an upgrade, as much as my wallet hates me saying that.
I think mine just screamed.
I think it is time to just step up console-wise a little bit.
I would agree with you, except for one problem, and it comes down to Tears of the Kingdom versus Scarlet and Violet. Yes, I agree that the console has its limitations. However, there is a very distinct difference in the level of polish between one and the other.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
And that's where the issue lies. Anybody who's playing on the Switch knows the Switch has limitations. We all know there's limitations. But the fact that they let a game slide without the full polish, something happened in that finalizing step for Scarlet and Violet did happen for Tears of the Kingdom. And this is where the comment came. Why is it that the $1 million franchise pumped out a much better game than the $1 billion franchise? That should not have happened. There was a missing step, and that right there is the disservice that a lot of the players have been arguing about. This is the #1 brand in the world, yet you're putting out a subpar product. This should not be.
And I do agree with it 100%.
As far as the Switch 2 goes, absolutely. I think there's going to be announced in September.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the handhelds that are coming out now, I mean, okay, they are designed to be sort of mini computers, but the caliber of handheld that's coming out now is ridiculous. I mean, for example, I don't know if you watched the PlayStation showcase, but they announced Project Q, which is the PlayStation 5 controller chopped in half with a screen in the middle. It doesn't look as seamless as the Steam Deck or the Switch, for example, and it is only going to be able to stream games. But I think now Nintendo are going to have to look at that and actually make some decisions and actually upgrade the Switch or create a whole new console to sort of combat that, because that's the way everyone's going now. Everybody's looking at handhelds because they've seen how much power can be packed into such a small form factor.
I think that's coming because of a few things. The announcement made by Microsoft about Call of Duty day and date as expected on a Switch, which, to be honest, Call of Duty, as it stands right now, I don't think would run well on the Switch. So the Switch 2, quote unquote, I think is what's going to be able to carry that, because I think Nintendo realizes that their innovation works, but they need to focus on the actual power of their innovation now, because it has been the one thing that has held that system back. And there's a level of expectation with playing a game like Call of Duty that I don't think we'll see with the Switch unless they've upgraded the hardware. There's also the fact that games are getting pretty big. There's a 60 gig game. Elden Ring, I think, was like 60, 65, somewhere around there. I know it's big. And the current chips that we're using for games for Nintendo don't fit that. think their biggest chip is a 32 gig chip is what they're currently using. It's a Micronix chip. I actually looked this up. However, there is on the books, Nintendo has purchased this particular chipset and they go up to 100 gigs. But there's no game on the Nintendo Switch that requires that particular cartridge size at the moment. Not only do they have a Switch 2 coming, but I also believe that it's going to be a backwards compatible system.
Yeah, look, they have definitely shown an interest in backwards compatibility with NSO Online. Obviously, it sucks that you have to have NSO Online to be able to get that backwards compatibility, but it's still there nonetheless. So I'll agree with you on that. I remember seeing something about them purchasing a new chip or getting access to a new chipset. I wasn't sure if it was CPUs or for the actual cartridges.
I don't see Nintendo chucking out a bunch of money out the window for a chip that they're never going to use.
Yeah.
I'm standing firm that the Switch 2, or whatever they call it, is going to be a more powerful system, obviously, but it's going to have to be something on par with the PlayStation 5, and it's going to be backwards compatible with all Switch games, because I think the operating system that they've got is solid. It's the lack of graphic processing that is really holding that system back.
Yeah, they definitely got, their OS is very streamlined, it's very clean. I mean, their store as well, I think, is one of the better game stores out there. So, I mean, they've definitely done well. But one thing they need to give us, I don't care whether we get a Switch 2 or Switch to the Moon or whatever they call it, we need themes. Because, for example, the Nintendo point system or the coins, whatever they are, where you can buy like avatars and that, or actual physical items. For example, for myself, I live in South Africa, I can't get access to those items. So if they offer sort of like themes along with those avatars and whatever, and they had them on like a weekly cycle like they did for Scarlet and Violet, Tears of the Kingdom, I think that could be really good as well, just from a customization standpoint, to sort of make your Switch your own.
There's no real drive for me to use my points. They're sitting there going expired because there's literally nothing on this that I can spend points on that I want. I honestly don't even see the reason for the system. It's for the setup itself. I know some people picked up some stuff, and I mean, I've spent some of my points in the past. I've got a couple of posters from Legend of Zelda, but those are far and few in between. Normal, there really just isn't anything I want. Even the whole, hey, you can reduce the cost of your game by doing this. Yeah, I get physical copies from stores. Those points are totally useless because I will not buy anything digital if I can avoid it.
I think, okay, in terms of buying games with those points, they have helped me quite a bit, because obviously I also buy physical, but for example, for like the Pokemon games and Tears of the Kingdom I could wait because I got the collector's edition, but for Pokemon I couldn't actually wait to start playing the games, even though I had put in a request to try and get them early, which I actually did eventually, but I didn't know if that was going to happen, so I bought digital copies, and those points helped quite a bit, because myself as well, I save up a lot of points, because if I'm in that mindset of I want it now, then I'll get it. Fortunately, I'm in the position where I do have the expendable income, and not everybody does. So I've built up quite a large number of points, and I got Pokemon Game for, I think it worked out to like 47% off. I think in places where, because I mean, even here in South Africa, a lot of the game stores don't carry Nintendo Switch games. It's mostly just PlayStation and Xbox. So I think in countries like this, it definitely does help having a digital store.
Yeah, I can see that, and definitely, don't get me wrong. I know there's people who are hardcore digital, and this helps them because it just makes the next purchase that much cheaper. And in your case, it's hard to find physical copies of games, so obviously, yeah, you're more likely, more forced to play those types of games. But for me, it's just like I have all these points, I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. For example, before Draco and I started recording today, I watched the Xbox showcase and we discussed, so Bethesda is coming out with Starfield, highly anticipated game, but their past track record hasn't been too great. They've created amazing games, but as Draco rightly said, when those games first came out, it was actually the communities that made those games playable. Skyrim, riddled with bugs, still is. The Witcher 3, riddled with bugs, still is, not to the same extent. They did fix a lot of that. Fallout, some notoriously good games are within the Fallout franchise, but riddled with bugs and their own issues. I mean, Fallout 76 is probably the worst Fallout game we've ever got.
Hey, those aren't bugs; those are features.
Well, yeah, everybody needs a quirk. So GameFreak being a development studio that, for the most part, developed 2D games for the franchise. And I think they're still trying to find their feet. Unfortunately, it is taking them a bit longer to dial in their creation software and their compression software and everything that goes into it. But I do think at some point they are going to get it right. They do need a bit of assistance. As long as the games are playable and people are able to enjoy them, then if you feel you can live with the bugs, obviously, but buy the games if you didn't buy them at launch and wait to see if those bugs are fixed before you pick them up. But if you want to get them day one, by all means, if you feel you can live with the bugs until patches come out, by all means, go ahead. If you want to wait, then wait. And voice that. Tell your friends. Put on Twitter, listen guys, I'm very excited for these games. If you are excited, of course. We don't condone lying here over at the Pondcast, but if you want to wait, tell people, I'm extremely excited for these games, but I'm going to wait because I don't feel I can spend money on a game because of this, and this.
That's pretty much me. I mean, there's certain games I will buy day one, and I know they're going to be crazy, but there are others where I will not touch until I see fixes. No Man's Sky is probably one of the best examples of that. Game launched to the point where it was almost unplayable, and if you play it today, I've got friends who play it now, and all of the changes, all of the updates, all of the expansions that they've added have made that game very enticing for me to actually want to pick up. But again, it took them a while to get there, and so sometimes just waiting it out might actually be the better play on this. And with that brings this episode to a close. Let us know what your thoughts are on the state of the franchise. Do you think that the things that we've touched upon on cultivating the tremendous talent of the online community, that is, with the fake mons and the side games that have spawned throughout the years, or the accountability between the fact that we've gotten some very questionable releases for games in recent years? Let us know down below, and also be sure to share, like, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.